Hello. Good morning, everyone. I think good morning, good evening, good afternoon to others joining us from different parts of the world. My name is Pradeep Channavajula, and I'm your host for the webinar today. And I would like to walk you through a simple approach that we have experimented and successfully implemented, for many organizations around the world. The intention here is to look at how do we build competent project managers. Especially, this is an interesting topic in the current complex world that we live in, wherein we can see that the projects that we are dealing with have become more complex. The technologies that we are dealing with are also becoming innately complex, and there is very little of a science that we adopt in terms of improving the capabilities of project managers. To brief about myself, my name is Pradeep. I have had 25 years of experience in the space of competency development and workforce development, and I specialize in creating a framework that could help organizations improve the internal capabilities of the teams. I represent today QAI. QAI is a global consulting and workforce development organization, as many of you would know. Our focus is to solve three use cases, for a client. The first case is on efficiency, the second is on agility, and the third is on innovation. In our approach, we primarily focus on two critical enabling elements. One is the process and the methodology, and the second is on the people. We believe that if we can create competent workforce and provide them the right approach and framework, they would then be able to implement it and create a sustainable, measurable competitive advantage, in their own organizations, and which could help them to build their business. So without much ado, let's jump into the topic of today. And if you have some protocols, before we proceed further, so we have a chat window available to all of you. So I'll be constantly monitoring the chat and looking at the questions that you may be typing there. So if you do have any specific questions as we go along, please do post it in the chat box. We will certainly address them as appropriate. And I'll be the judge of when we should be addressing it and how we should be addressing it. But we certainly will address all the questions that you may have about it. The second expectation is that you're by default on mute, just to ensure there are no background noises and disturbances to the individuals who are joining from different parts of the world, from different devices. So if you have to have a question that you need to ask, you can certainly post it in the chat, and we certainly would, relevantly, if it is relevant, then we certainly can allow you to speak, but certainly we can continue our conversations. The third important protocol is towards the end of the session, we'd also be sharing with you a small feedback link. We would like you to post your feedback, tell us how we did and what we can improve. That will kind of help us to, make this conversations, much better. The entire presentation deck, as well as the recording of this particular session, would be even sent to you and to the individuals who have registered but could not make it due to business pressures. We certainly can, send that across to you, so you don't have to really be making any specific notes. And if you do still have questions, even after the whole session and after seeing the video, we would like you to kind of send us an email. We have two team members on the call today, Kumar, who is assisting me on the entire operations part of it. And we have Rupangi, who is the product owner of the entire program. She certainly is available on rupangi.agarwala. We'll share you the email contact, so you certainly can connect with her in India as well as on email. And, for those of you from India, she's very much accessible. You could certainly call her, talk to her, and understand, how you can implement it for your company. So Having said the protocols, now let's jump in, to understand what the approach is and what was the design that we created and what was it that we have learned, from various organizations who have had a similar challenge of creating competent project managers. Now, as you rightly understand, the biggest strength, if you look at in the knowledge economy, the biggest strength any organization can really have, is its ability to learn and translate that learning into action rapidly. And that's when they can take advantage, of the changes that are happening in the environment. And this is not anything new, for most of you, but I'm just trying to refresh, where we are coming from and what we are trying to attempt, by doing this approach. This approach, is currently implemented by around 12 organizations, and this has impacted over 2,000 plus, project managers, especially the organizations which have people who are certified, on project management professional program. So why did they do that? That's the exact question, that we are trying to address. And what did we do differently? And what was the new redesign? So if you see, the, the why becomes a very critical necessity for us to address before we go into the what and the how, right? Um, so we do acknowledge that project management is a business critical and a must-have capability today. And that's exactly where, organizations have realized, that the main issue that they were facing, many of my customers, around the world, few in the US, a lot of them in India, for them, the main challenge was that the project managers was not really capable enough to handle new technology, the new methods of agile, the new methods of release automation, and there are new challenges in terms of addressing stakeholders who are quite conversant with these technologies. So the fundamental question they were asking themselves is, are our project managers really relevant, for the projects that we are dealing with today? And are these project managers, able to graduate, from just doing transactional activity into becoming a strategic, contributor to the overall success of the entire program? And there they realized there were quite a few shortages in terms of their understanding, but they didn't have a method to find out what they were short on and what they were necessary to be equipped on. The second important challenge that they realized was they were doing a lot of training, but the training was not really what you call as a skill building activity. Because most of the time in the training, the trainer, would probably disseminate knowledge and information, but it would not translate into practical action or practical adaptation of that particular technique into the real world, and more so specifically into the context of their own organization. And most of these trainings were not giving them the return on investment that they were expecting in terms of truly skill building. And some organizations realized that even if it graduated from just dissemination of knowledge to building a skill, it was still not seen as a strategic competency that the organization possessed, which they could kind of use for attracting new clients or assuring their existing clients that they had necessary competency as an organization. It was largely individualistic in terms of demonstration of the competency. So many of the L&D had said, hey, we do not want to do any more. And I'm sure many of you would have heard, the common statement that training is where the trainer is happy, but the learner has never learned anything out of it. So that, and most of the trainers as well, they were going with what we call a standard definitions of what they should be training on. So they would refer to a body of knowledge of PMP. They would then address all the 10 areas that were listed in the body of knowledge with equal emphasis, and they would not know where exactly should they be emphasizing, specific to the client that was sitting right in front of them. So clearly, as you can see, training is not equivalent to building a skill, and skill building is not equivalent to building a competency, and that was the true experience of many organizations. The third type of challenges that we have seen while discussing with our customers was they do have individuals who are certified on project management professional program, which is a very well adopted, well designed program, but unfortunately for them, the certification was more of an entry criteria into the job, rather than an essential certification that would qualify them to perform the job. So for them, the reason was, okay, they wanted something more than the PMP certification, and they did not want to accept that certification was a baseline of what their current capability looked like. So they said, hey, do we have any different way or any new methods, that are out there, with the advancements that were happening in the learning and development space, saying, can we evaluate our project managers based on what we think is the role that he should be performing, and how do we go about evaluating not only their knowledge, but can we also look at how they can apply this particular skill, and whether they are behaviorally tuned to perform the job at hand. So clearly, as we can see, that certification was more of an entry point qualification, but it was not like an indication of their existing capability. And as you may know, that most of these exams or evaluations or assessments, they take the form of being multiple choice questions. So it's not, and then it requires a lot of effort to design a good question. And that's exactly where, they were more indicative only of the knowledge that the individual possessed, more so on the correctness of the concept rather than the application of the concept. So for them, the challenge was, are there any scientific ways, for us to evaluate their current capabilities? And is there a way to design a learning plan, which was necessary for them to improve, from current level of competency to a different level of competency? The logical question thereby becomes, so what is the desired level of competency? And is there a universal definition of what the right competencies a project manager should possess? At that point, the organizations have come back and said that they do not agree with, as in we took a standard roadmap and we showed them and said, hey, this is what XYZ company said is an ideal competency. And these are like large organizations. So the assumption is that they have thought through, they have put their brains together, and they have been able to come up with what is needed for a project manager of a certain level, to perform in the organization. Interestingly, the definition of the role was not consistent across organizations. Each organization had a different weightage given to a certain set of skills, and we didn't have a consensus on what should be the ideal competency map, for a project manager, which led to the realization that each organization would define their own role, and for each role they would define the specific skills, and for each of those skills they would assign different weightages, and each weightage does not mean that the proficiency demonstrated is same. They could have a different level of proficiency. So for example, in one organization, they said the individual who is a lead, who is graduating into a manager role, should have an understanding of planning. They didn't want him to prepare a plan. They just wanted him to have an understanding of the plan so that he could participate in the project activities. So here, naturally, the lesson or the realization for us was that we need to define something which is role aligned, role specific, and organization specific. And that's when we can actually address the challenge. So that's the important takeaway from that particular activities. So then we realized that a role skill map is something that we essentially need for each organization so that they can build their competencies in a structured manner. and they would not need to waste the time that they are spending in standard box training programs offered by many organizations. At the same time, when we went into the training delivery, the challenges the organization was facing was that one, training was not sufficient. So for example, if you look at a role of a project manager, there are four layers of skills that they would require. One layer of skills could be largely around technology and being able to understand different technologies and the changes that are happening in the technologies. And then they would need to graduate into their functional skill, which is largely around planning, evaluation, to tracking, to controlling, to operating. And it is more about managing, the program and ensuring the delivery of the particular program. The third set of skills we saw were where individuals needed to demonstrate, their capabilities as part of a team, which means they need to understand, how exactly the management elements would work. Like examples being, how would you report? How would you inform about the status? How would you discuss risks? How would you ensure that the risks are mitigated? Then how would you ensure that your stakeholders are kept happy? So there was a clear indication that, and then there is also a lot of tools. Today we talk not just about MS Project, but there are many tools that organizations use, to keep the entire project management in control. So that's where we realized, that a single training or a 2-day continuous training is not going to solve this particular problem. We need to create a learning delivery mechanism which is aligned to a structure of how the competency should be seen and how the competency should be built, because there are interdependencies between multiple of these competencies. So, for example, if your organization is largely into developing mobile applications in an agile manner, now, unless the individual project manager is aligned to the philosophy of Agile, unless he understands mobile application technology, he may not be able to demonstrate his capabilities in the truest sense of the word. So the organizations realized, that given all these challenges, we need to redesign the way we look at, project management competency as an area of interest. So, in summary, they realize project management is essential. They realize that it is a critical competency. They also realize that in light of the changes that are happening, the current method of simply training individuals is not a good idea. And purely aligning with the certification and building competency is also not a good idea. So what they needed was a custom role-based organizational context-specific competency development approach. So thereby what we realized is that, simply put, creating competence really needs a redesign. So we went back to the drawing board and then we started to uh, ask ourselves, because QA has this role-based competency approach, which was very popular, which was actually used for designing, competency for various other functions within an organization. So we have been using this for the last 30 years in the quality engineering space. So we decided to take a relook at the competencies of project manager and adapt this role-based competency approach in a two project management area. And what we are about to see is what came out of such an adaptation. So in QAI, just to give you a kind of a quick rundown about how the role-based competency approach works. In our view of the world and in many of the L&D universes of the world, we believe that a competency has to deal with three important elements. The first element is, do we know, which is primarily an knowledge aspect of a particular activity. So which means you need to know those concepts, you need to know those constructs, you need to know those processes, you need to know those definitions, you need to know those procedures. It's purely whether do you remember and understand, these elements clearly, and can you repeat if I ask you the question. So for example, if I say, do you know what is earned value management? The project manager should be able to tell me what's the standard accepted definition of earned value management. That tells me something. That tells me that this individual knows what an earned value management is. The next question which logically comes in, which is what we normally call a skill portion of the competency, is can you calculate or can you apply this concept that you know of earned value management in a project and show me what's the earned value management in a particular project. And that's where a lot of times you'll see the capability, in spite of knowing the ability to apply, becomes a critical element for organizations to look at. Because in an educational environment, your just knowing is good enough and you would get your certificate. But in a practical real life situation, you will be required to apply what you know, and that's when you're considered to be an eligible candidate, or that's when you're considered a competent individual. Now, knowing and applying, which is knowledge and skill, are not just sufficient. They are necessary, but they are not only the elements. We also have to see whether the individual has the behavioral interest to perform, and can he demonstrate that intent to apply those concepts that he knows in the current context. And that's when you bring about a change in the organization. That's when you bring about an improvement. That's when you bring about a transformation. I'm sure most of us know a lot of stuff. We apply probably a part of that stuff, and we probably do not lead through or follow through with that particular stuff. That's why we don't bring about change. So if you really want a very transformative individual, a person who is very strongly oriented to making all the programs successful, he also needs to demonstrate an ability to perform. Now, that's the academic concept of what a competency is. Now, how do we adapt it to a project management situation? So what we did was, we kind of broke up. So we took the premise, the assumption here is that every role is unique. Each role, will have a certain set of skills, that we need to demonstrate. When I call skills, you can call them competency, but for the sake of ease of understanding and to make sure that it's a lighter word on our brain, we chose the word skill. But what we are referring to is competency, that is competency categories. And within each competency category, we said, there are specific areas of skill or a specific competency areas, that the individual should be adapted to. And then there would be a specific unit of competency. And for each of those units of competency, we need to have a level of proficiency. So give an example. So let's say we say, the roles in an organization can be, a lead, a manager, a project manager, a program manager, a portfolio manager. You could extend the definition. Now, this is not a standard definition here, mind you. So you can define in your organization a role which you think is involved with the project. Now, as I mentioned, this is like a triple distillation model, of manufacturing an individual here. But then we realize that there are layers of skills, correct? So there is a element of technology, there's an element of functional aspects, there is an element of management, there is an element of tools and automation, there's an element of business, there is an element of leadership. Now, what we felt appropriate was that there are four categories into which these skills can be summarized. You clearly see that there is functional skill, which is largely around their ability to plan, their ability to execute, their ability to track, their ability to control, and their ability to improve, right? Then there is a set of business skills because you deal with customers, in many cases in a program or a project management situation. So you need to understand, how to deal with, scope, how to discuss the issues with relevant stakeholders, how to ensure that you remain on track, on budget, on schedule. So there are many aspects which affect the business. There is also an ability to come up with innovative solutions given the constraints that are necessary for the organization, right? So we looked at that category of skills as business skills. Then we said there is an element of performance. You have to deliver results in a business environment, which is why there is a strong orientation around performance as well. And we have some skills which are focused specifically on performance. And many a times, as a project manager or a person with the capability to manage and lead a project to a success, you will work with a team, which is where, a set of skills which are necessary for them is about how he sets a vision, how he creates a shared vision, how he brings the team together, and how they would be able to lead this team, in a positive and a successful way. So that's where we said there is a leadership skill that the individual as well needs. Now, these would translate further, as you can see, into specific areas, like stakeholder management. Then, from the stakeholder management, the task that comes out, which is a unit of skill, would be to prepare a stakeholder map. Now, does everyone participate in stakeholder maps preparation? Not all, but then would I have is if I'm a project manager, would I need my team member who is a project lead to have at least an understanding of how a stakeholder map is, what it is, and how it should be used. Because if I don't have that kind of a visibility, and if I don't have that ability to communicate, I may be speaking Greek and Latin to my team members. So the idea here is that there must be a certain level of proficiency that I need to demonstrate. So what we did was we when we created this particular structure, the natural transition was to, okay, how does a typical map look like, right? And that's exactly what we attempted. But before doing that, we tried to bucket ourselves into, as I said, the concept shows us multiple layers, multiple units, multiple proficiencies. But then in the case of a project management activity, we narrowed down to specifically, three areas which we believed are essential. Okay. So that's where we identified, like, what we looked at the literature around PMBOK, we looked at Prince 2 methodology, we looked at multiple other literatures that were published, on project management and program management. And then we realized that there are certain competencies that individuals should have if they were to be qualified as a project manager. This is more like a bucket list or a wish list of all the necessary competencies. And we broad based them into three broad categories. The first one is functional competencies. And these are primarily what we felt like, PMI is addressing really well. So they do talk about integration, they do talk about scope, schedule, cost, quality. These are more of, if I have to be a project manager, I must have these, without a doubt. Then the business competencies that we realized were like, they should be able to manage a team. They should be able to look at the program life cycle. They should be able to navigate uncertainty. They should be looking at delivery management in a strategic manner. They should look at performance management. They look at work management and engagement of stakeholders. Now, these were borrowed from the general literature and then validated with multiple iterations with multiple customers, who participated in our initial pilot programs. And that's where we narrowed down to 8 competencies that we have heard commonly across, the organizations that we dealt with in the sample size, right? Then we looked at and said, okay, hey, if is it sufficient if they have just functional competencies and business competencies? Then we said, no, no, no. They also need to have some of the competencies that enable them to deliver results to the business. Which is where we looked at, how do they think about, value creation? How do they take leadership and initiative? How do they tailor and adapt their existing programs? How do they handle complexity? How resilient are they? Are they really dealing with change management? Are they really looking at exceeding quality? So we kind of identified around 12 delivery competencies, which are essential for them to, move the project from concept to commercialization, right? Now, how does this play out? So we kind of put all of them together and we said, okay, what's the map look like, right? So as you can see on one side, we looked at various roles, and this is, please to understand, this is just an indicative map. This map gets customized for each organization depending on their definition of what the role should be doing and what exactly they would like to add. So what you see on the left-hand side are indicative roles that we believe a typical organization would have. And what you see on the x-axis, which is project initiation all the way to impact and influence, are the choices organizations made about what the person should be focusing on as a skill area. So, and again, what you see in the box here at the intersection is the level of proficiency that they would expect. So what this map says, if I were to interpret for you, is a project manager should be very strong and demonstrate a ability to create and manage and coach project initiation and project planning phases. In project execution, he should be very strong in analyzing and correcting. And whereas in project tracking, he need not be so much, he must be able to apply all the concepts of project tracking, but he may not be so directly involved, and he doesn't need to demonstrate that level of proficiency. On achievement action, they're saying, okay, the person should have an understanding of what we mean by achievement and what we mean by impact. Now, as I said, this is not a standard definition. This is a sample definition of some organization for your visualization that we put up here. Okay. So the question could be, can I change these, to suit my own organization? Of course you can. Can I change my areas of focus? Of course you can. Can I define my own roles? Because in my company, it is not project lead. We call them as manager level 1, manager level 2, and manager level 3. And that's how we define. Of course you can. So everything that you see can be customized, but there is certainly so the structure that we help with is we can help you to define what those roles are. We can define what those skill areas of focus should be and what would be an ideal proficiency level that they need to demonstrate. Now that's exactly where we are saying that the approach right now, as you can see, what we have moved from is we moved from a standard run-of-the-mill assumption-based training programs to building a small, simple, a quick and easy competency approach, and which is very role specific, which is customizable to each context, and it is very well tested with many organizations that we can come across, right? And again, as I said, this is not that we are speaking out of the thin air. We have already done for 12 different clients, and we've customized the roadmap, and we've also graduated a number of project managers through this particular approach. So it's well tested and very much available. So what do we do? So how is it how does it translate into real action? So if you see here, the first step obviously is to map the skills. Now, which means we need to have some form of a competency framework. Now, the question can be, hey, I don't have a roadmap or I don't have a kind of a skill map, of my project managers. So you could borrow from the structure, you could borrow from the areas, and in a very short time, typically organizations have taken not more than a week, to come up with a competency map of their own choice based on the description. We also have taken the job description of the individual, defined by the organization, and use that to convert into a role skill map. It's a quick, very easy process. We can teach you how to go about doing that. It's completely doable. We are not complicating your life by adding more layers of confusion. We are simply making it easier for you to say, hey, this is what I want the individual to perform. If this is what I want to perform, then let's see where he stands. And then we do an assessment activity. The assessment, as you clearly notice, we are not limiting to just an evaluation of knowledge. We are creating three-step assessment activity. The first step is, of course, to do an assessment of knowledge. The second step is an assessment of skill. And the third step is an assessment of behavior. Now, how do you do this? Assessment of knowledge is done through an online examination. The individual is given a set of 75 to 100 questions. Again, these are indicative. You can always customize. You could say, I want them to do a 2-hour examination. But a good practice is that we normally would like to do a small assessment of 60 minutes and 75 questions. That itself is rigorous. And these are aligned to the proficiency levels that you've specified. So the system picks up based on the proficiency levels that we define for each role. It identifies the relevant questions, it provides them with a certain complexity. The system is very adaptive, which means if you answer the first 5 questions very quickly, the system realizes that you're actually very competent, so it starts to pose you more complex questions, to make sure that you're limited there. Again, the intent is to see the gaps in terms of your learning and the ability of you to handle complexity, right? The second step of the evaluation is a case study based evaluation. So there we provide them a situation, there we provide them a playbook, and there we expect the individual to take, a week time to respond to that particular case study with a solution. And once we see the solution, we will then send it to an evaluator who kind of screens the evaluation. We have a specific rubric given to the individual to evaluate. So that way we get an individual identification of what gaps in application does he see. A summary could be like, yes, this individual knows, but then he cannot apply this particular concept on in finding on improving his capabilities. The third is a behavioral assessment, which is done through an expert interview, with an project management expert from our side. We have individuals who normally are like 15 to 20 years of practical experience in program management. And these individuals are the ones who will interview the candidate to see, and it's a structured interview. It's not, again, these are not mechanisms to eliminate the individual from the job. These are mechanisms to identify their gaps. And these gaps are then used, to design a learning program. So instead of putting everyone into a common room and assuming they have a same level of knowledge, the approach takes a very customized, individualistic approach to help the individuals focus on the relevant gaps that they need to fill in. And that's where we bridge the gaps through learning. And then we provide them situations or environments in a way they can practice. So there are two ways in which this can happen. One, the organization is provided the candidate back, and you may have the necessary wherewithal or the teams who can coach and mentor the individual. Or, we could also provide, a coach to supervise their operations for a certain period of time. And once the individual goes through all these steps, then you realize that like another person is capable, and that's when you normally would give him a recognition in the form of a certification. Now, there are many advantages in terms of following an approach of this nature, and I'll quickly come to that in a short while. But as I said, so one is to map then a knowledge, which is going through an online assessment, a contextual application, which is through a case study, and an interview with SAB, for the behavioral evaluation. Now, typically, as I said, the training also is designed in alignment with the gaps. And that means, in fact, I would like to call it as learning rather than training, because in training, you're more focused on the trainer disseminating knowledge. In the learning, you're more focused on the learner learning stuff, correct? And that's the technical difference that I'd like to emphasize. So here, the interest is to enable the individual to learn and practice. So instead of cramming up all the information into a single program, the activity is spread out, over a period of time. Again, what you see here is a sample learning intervention. But the idea is we create a foundation on project management, which is where if the individual has failed on the knowledge aspect, we recommend them to go through the project management foundation, get a comprehensive understanding, and retake the knowledge assessment before he moves on to a case study. The second aspect is to go through project delivery, and where the intent is to focus on the delivery principles, and that's where we try to ensure that when an individual comes out of the second phase of learning, he can de-risk delivery and he can participate on the success of the project. The third layer is on performance, and the fourth layer is on leadership. And as you can see, each one of them have a very specific focus, and based on the focus, you will have relevant topics that the individual should be trained on. Now, so as you can see, then you go through the post-assessment, which is based on evaluation again, and then we take the performance feedback of the individual over a period of this duration of the training, and both of them lead to what we call as a certification of competency, which is what QAI can award along with your organization's credentials. So it'll be a joint co-branded certification, if I may say so, right? So clearly, we have. So what does QAI bring to the table? We have around 40 plus case studies that we have prepared, which are vetted, and available. We have a question bank of almost 600 plus questions in each one of these areas. And we have a total of 10 functional competencies, 8 performance competencies, and 12 delivery competencies that we've covered from a content and an execution perspective. We also have, around 10 plus evaluators in-house, who continue to perform the activity of, improving the individual's capability. We also have a number of trainers, and since we have around 20 plus trainers, who are available with us, and we have currently addressed and solved the problem for 15 plus clients, and we've completed over 2,000 plus assessments at the moment. So some of who are the clients, some of them as this is the marketing element, but then again, there are organizations like Cognizant, Capgemini, ITC, Mahindra, NEC, Honeywell, and recently we've added 3 more clients. That's why the number went up to 15. We have Coforge, we have Nucleus, which are mid-segment companies. We also have, Regions Bank in the US, Humana Insurance in the US, who have adopted this particular program as a way to improve their competencies of the teams. Okay, so that's what I had to present to you, because we believe that, in summary, we believe that each client has a unique orientation to how they would like to build a competency. What we have is a framework that helps you to tune your competency development with specific to project management in a clear manner. This enables you to customize, your learning experiences. It enables you to optimize, the training experiences. It also enables you to focus on the specific gaps rather than, blindside the whole competency development activity. It also changes the orientation in the individuals about your investments in learning, because many times when they see a program of this nature, we've seen the employees really like it because they know that there is someone who is listening to what their gaps are rather than being put into a standard training program or into a single classroom where the trainer assumes everyone has a homogeneous understanding of the subject. They feel a lot more, interested, because they know that this is something that they can take advantage of. We've also seen individuals come back and see that, like, when it is spread over a period of 3 to 4 months, we've seen the attrition levels drop, because now they see the company is investing in learning, the company is taking a serious and a scientific approach to learning. They are very personal about the whole approach, and they are in a position to kind of participate well and take advantage. And it is not disturbing them from their regular work. It's spread across a period of 3 to 4 months, so people see this as a very strong program and an initiative as well. At the same time, the cost of the entire program also is quite optimal, because if you look at it, for a typical training cost of like a PMP training, which is like 15 to 16,000 rupees in India, for a PMP training program, we've noticed that they get 4 or 5 days of training, correct? However, when you look at a typical client of ours, they spend on an average, around 35 to 40,000 rupees, for 14 days of training, with assessments, with the entire coaching. So they see a lot more value, with a 40 or 30,000 rupee investment compared to a 14,000 rupee investment for 5 days of training, right? So that's what I had to submit to you. I would love to hear any questions, any points of view, that you may have. Love to learn from you as to how, this is. We will also, I'm just posting, a feedback link. I would like to hear your feedback, and, I would like to hear about your experiences that you're going through in your organization at this point in time. Any questions? No questions? Kumar, maybe I think we can unmute all of them and then they can probably speak. Typing could be a pain. If you want to ask, you can continue to unmute yourself and certainly ask a question as well. Kumar can enable that.
Yes, we allow.
Can all the participants unmute themselves, Kumar?
Yes, but they can unmute.
Yeah, I think he has enabled the control so you could unmute and provide a point of view. Yeah. Anyone? No questions?
The interview, in one of the recent interviews, I was asked what is P30, P50, P70. I know they
Mhm.
are the probabilities, but how to answer it in an interview perspective? That is what I wanted to know if you can help me with this.
Okay. So that's more of a so that's not a question on the approach that we are dealing with, but I'll answer it this way. Um, the probabilities that they were mentioning primarily, were about a certain task, being completed on time, and they were trying to see how you see a certain set of risks of that particular activity not happening. So we normally calculate the probabilities of any form of a risk, and that's where we use that particular numbers that you were mentioned. Okay. So it's a part of risk identification, risk planning, and risk mitigation. That's the area in which that comes up, Sanjay. You could write to me a mail and
Yeah,
I would send you a detailed answer on how you could answer that question. Okay.
yeah, lovely. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Yeah.
So no questions then, So okay, no worries. I know that many of us, even though it is Zoom, are very shy of asking a question online, because we may look that we are not knowledgeable on those areas and expose our weaknesses. But again, it was a great interacting with all of you. We've had a good response. So we will, as I mentioned, just to summarize, we will follow through with a presentation that we have seen here. We will follow through with the feedback link, and we will share with you, the information about taking it further discussions. We would love to hear your context, and we would like to see how we can work with you and help you. Okay, really appreciate all of you taking time to join the conversation. If there is nothing else, then we can conclude the session.
If there are one
Is
question,
that okay?
Pradeep, one
Yes, go ahead.
comes to get the how to benefit from this program at individual level.
How to benefit from the program at an individual level.
Mhm.
Yes. So as I said, so QA's programs, if you notice, are also aligned to this particular competency framework, Sanjay. So when an individual says, I want to get trained, from QAI, we have stopped just giving them a standard run-of-the-mill programs. In fact, we ask them to go through an assessment to see where the gaps are, and that way we could focus on the right gaps to fix for the individual. So the way, if you are an individual you would like to use, is to first start with an assessment activity. And once you complete the assessment and you know your gaps, that's when you would like to focus on the relevant areas of importance rather than just signing up for a standard program. So you'll see the learning becoming more micro learning, if I may call it, for lack of better word. So you could pick up that specific skill, rather than wasting 4 or 5 days of your time and getting confused with 20 different concepts, right? Like for example, think of it like this, Sanjay. If you go to a typical training program of PMP, correct? In 5 days, they would teach you 10 capability areas. That is, in 40 hours, you are given all the knowledge that you can think of in PMBOK, which is an 800-page document, right? Do you believe that you can become a master at it even though you pass the exam?
No.
That's exactly my point. Case closed, right? So, and when you go into an interview or when you go into a client situation, the challenge is they're not, it's like an examination paper, right? You know, when you're sitting in front of a person who is interviewing you for a project, right? He's trying to look at the project context and he's trying to see, do you have the specific things the project needs? So when the approach of selection is so contextualized, should we have our training also to be contextualized to what we need? Now, interestingly, the education model is to say, hey, I'll give you everything that you need. You figure out what you want to do with it. I think that's a wrong approach anymore, right? You know, in the sense we don't need to go with that approach. Like most of us who are engineers, have also gone through the same model. Do you agree? 4 years of engineering, and in 4 years of engineering, you would accumulate 120 credits, and that would mean you would do almost like 50 plus courses. Each course you would have spent 40 hours on an average. That's 2,000 hours is what you have spent. Ideally, 2,000 hours spread over 4 years, you didn't feel the pinch. But when you go to a postgraduate program, then it is 2 years and you'll probably have around 30 courses and you'll spend 1,200 hours in 2 years. So as you can see, the way education works is that they try to improve the intensity by reducing the duration, and that's a natural filtration mechanism. So the individual who could survive through the pressure is selected, right? But is that the ideal way of building competency in an organization? I don't agree with that. That's where we said, no, no, we need to focus on only the relevant skill that the person does in his job. Because if I learn the PMP and I join an organization and they only tell me you'll only be involved with tracking and control of a project. Ideally, we should have just tracking and control as a focus. Then I would probably excel at it and perform really well at it rather than learning about planning, organization, etc. in a generic manner, correct? So the idea is to kind of say what is needed. Let's build the talent to what it is needed so the learning experience is less stressful, less costly, and meaningful. Are you getting my point? And then 1 year later, the individual goes through the next phase of learning. Nothing wrong with it. But there is now in that model, what happens is there is a strong appreciation for what you're learning and what you're applying because you're seeing results for what you learn and what you apply. Otherwise, you end up time boxing everyone into a shorter duration. Anyways, it's again a lot of philosophy out there, Sanjay. But again, as I said, focus on what you will need, for the job and go backwards from that. That will be easier. That way you'll make yourself more relevant, more employable, and much more easier to progress in career. Make sense? Anyways, so thanks a lot to everyone, for joining taking the time and joining the call. But as I said, like, if you wish to continue the conversation, my email ID, is very much, there. I'll send it on the email as well. Rupangi will share a detailed mail as well. So I think that should be it. It's tough when there's no feedback. So any comments would be also nice. Okay. Thank you, Lakmal. She said it's a great presentation. So thank you for that. I hope it gives you some idea to think about. Again, thank you for all joining in. Again, I think it's time, so let's kind of close the shop. We will certainly be available for further discussion as well. Thank you all. Bye.